Just imagine for a moment being the hottest dude on television. Women are fainting or throwing themselves at you. Men are copying how you dress, how you comb your hair. Yet you're terrified for your safety, hiding behind bodyguards 24/7. That was Don Johnson in the 1980s, but that's just his Miami Vice era facade. What if I told you the man behind the $1,000 suits once taped an alligator's mouth shut, or smoked MJ in the White House, or single-handedly launched Bruce Willis's career? Stick with me, because by the end of this video you'll know why Don Johnson is more than an 80s heartthrob and how he's still riding waves of reinvention at age 75. Did he really do the deed with his babysitter when he was 12 years old? How did his roommate get murdered? Was Don really taken into custody years ago with $8 billion worth of bank statements in his trunk? And about that reptile, why did he need to tape an alligator's mouth shut? Let's get into this, because you aren't going to believe some of these stories. Don Johnson, Hollywood's coolest guy. Donald Wayne Johnson was born December 15th, 1949 in his grandmother's house in the tiny town of Flat Creek, Missouri. His father, Wayne, was a farmer. His mother, Nell, worked as a beautician. When he was born, Don's mother was just 16 years old and his father 19. As you can imagine, money was tight. When Don was 6, the family packed up and moved to Wichita, Kansas. His father began working for Boeing Aircraft at that point. He grew up with 2 younger brothers and 1 younger sister, and has described his childhood as incredibly dysfunctional and abusive. Both of his parents were often absent, stressed out, or both. In interviews, Don has said that his rage-filled father frequently beat them. At age 12, Johnson's parents divorced. Around that time, Don lost his virginity to his 16-year-old babysitter. After living with his siblings and his mother for a year, Don ended up in juvenile court and was sent to live with his father in Missouri. He's never said what he did to end up in court, but he's called himself a little hellion at that age and admitted that it was impossible for his mother to manage him. He attended Wichita South High School and worked several part-time jobs, including as a butcher's apprentice and a ladies' shoe salesman. Don has always been a ladies' man, and I can imagine this guy bending down to help a gal in the shoe store fit some new high heels on. I suspect women started lining up out the door. When he was kicked out of a high school business class by an exasperated teacher for falling asleep, he was at risk of not having enough credits to graduate. He struck a deal with the high school's drama teacher, agreeing to enroll in drama class, and was ultimately cast in the school's production of West Side Story. He graduated in 1967. This led to him auditioning for the summer repertory program at the University of Kansas, where he won a scholarship and began attending as a drama major. While there, Johnson began dating his 29-year-old acting teacher. He was only 18 at the time. Johnson only made it to his sophomore year before auditioning for the American Conservatory Theater and leaving the university to move to San Francisco to devote himself to acting. This was in 1969. Somewhere in here, around 1968 or 1969, Don got married. He was married to a dancer for 2 months, and the marriage was later annulled. Her name has never been mentioned in interviews. In the late 60s, Don also fronted for a psychedelic rock band called Horses. They released only one self-titled album in 1969. It went nowhere, but these musical roots pulled Johnson back in years later. Johnson's next foray on stage was in Fortune and Men's Eyes, directed and produced by Sal Mineo. This led to Don's role in the film The Magic Garden of Stanley Sweetheart in 1970. By 1971, Don was living with Pamela DeBars, who was basically a groupie for rock bands. His work on stage and on film and television continued with Zachariah and Lollipop and Roses in 1971, then The Harrod Experiment in 1973. Fun fact, Johnson displayed full frontal nudity in The Harrod Experiment. It was on this set that he met Melanie Griffith, who was an extra on the film. Her mother was actually Don's co-star. Melanie was only 14 years old at that time, while Don was 24. Although it's said that Melanie moved in with him around this time, Don is also credited with having married his second wife in 1973. Like his first marriage, this one was also annulled, but only after a few days. We don't know this lady's name. Don has called her a rich bimbo in some interviews. It's not clear in his historical timeline how this second marriage folded into his relationship with the young Melanie Griffith. Johnson was in the movie A Boy and His Dog in 1975. This won a Saturn Award for Best Actor, but the movie was not a hit. He was a guest star on various TV programs around this time, like Kung Fu, The Rookies, Police Story, and Barnaby Jones. At one point, like we discussed in the Tom Selleck bio, Johnson was on The Dating Game. Apparently, that was common for actors living in the area during that time. And in a shocking turn of events, in 1976, Don's roommate, Sal Mineo, who was the director and producer of the first big show Don did in San Francisco in 1969, was murdered. Tons of controversy and mystery surrounded this crime. Sal was openly bisexual, which was a rare thing in Hollywood in the early to mid-70s. He was stabbed outside his home late one evening after returning from a rehearsal. 2 different eyewitnesses saw a man fleeing the scene. Police had no suspects for 16 months until a wife came forward saying her husband did it. This man was ultimately convicted, but his wife shot herself before testifying, and his appearance did not match the 2 eyewitness accounts. Don Johnson was, of course, shocked by the murder of his roommate. Don's love life has more twists and turns than a soap opera. It was in 1976 that Johnson finally married Melanie Griffith. As I mentioned before, they had met on set in 1973 when she was just 14. The 2 divorced that same year, and yes, if you're trying to keep count, this would be divorce number 3 for Don, all by the time he was 27. In 1979, Don met country music star Tanya Tucker on the set of TV movies Amateur Night at the Dixie Bar and Grill and The Rebels. They dated for a couple of years, and in 1981 we find them walking into a restaurant in Los Angeles together. But Don left the restaurant with Patty D. Arbanville. Don had met Patty a few years before at Andy Warhol's studio in New York. Patty had been standing on a table completely nude when Don first met her, apparently leaving quite an impression. That night in LA, when Don ran into her in the restaurant, it was for the second time. It's typical for Don to talk up his being the bad boy, and as evidenced by this quote about Patty, she moved in that night, and we stayed in bed for about 8 days. The houseboy kept bringing food and water. Patty became pregnant in 1982, and the couple agreed that they weren't in a position to get married. Don's son, Jesse Wayne Johnson, was born in December of that year. In 1984, 15 long years after moving to San Francisco and struggling to establish his career, Johnson landed one of the biggest roles of all time. It was a starring role in Miami Vice. The show ran for 6 years, from 1984 to 1990. Michael Mann was the show's executive producer. Its cinematic style, with rapid edits, handheld cameras, and contemporary music, was a drastic departure from traditional cop dramas, and used Miami's vibrant underbelly and notorious drug scene as a backstop. Johnson went from journeyman actor to international superstar. The pastel suits, the unshaven stubble, the speedboats, and Ferraris. Johnson's character, Sonny Crockett, wasn't just a TV cop, he was a cultural revolution. Crockett lived on a boat with his pet alligator, Elvis. During one comedic bit on David Letterman, Letterman asked Johnson if the alligator was trained. Johnson explained, "The expression trained alligator is like a contradiction in terms. They have not evolved 1 second in 100 million years. They can put some bad hurt on you, pal." Johnson claimed that one day after a close call with the animal, He taped the alligator's mouth shut in between takes in an attempt to keep himself, co-stars, and guest stars from being bitten. In 1986, Johnson won a Golden Globe for Best Actor. The show was nominated for several Emmys and became the hottest thing on TV. The fame was intense. At the height of his popularity, Don had to travel with bodyguards everywhere, sometimes even on set. Women would mob him. Guys wanted to be his best friend, or steal his fancy watch, or even test his mettle by taking a swing at the famous Sonny Crockett. In his own words, it was dangerous being Don Johnson. In the early 80s, Johnson got to the point where he was frequenting a particular bar in New York City. He became friendly with the bartender there, a guy who was funny, handsome, and a great storyteller. In a flash of inspiration, Johnson called the casting director for Miami Vice and insisted his bartender friend get a chance to come in and read a script. The guy turned out to be Bruce Willis, of course, and Don claims to have launched his acting career as well as maintaining a lifelong friendship with him. In the middle of all this, in 1986, with impeccable timing, Don released his debut album, Heartbeat. The title track hit number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, and the music video, which featured Johnson in leather and denim, became a staple on MTV. It was also in 1986 that he and Patty split up for good. He had been romantically linked with model Danya Fiorentino in the early 1980s and again in the mid-80s. And also Sally Adams. Oh, and also when Sybil Shepherd published her autobiography in 2000, she mentioned getting busy with Don during their work together on the television miniseries The Long Hot Summer in 1985. Did you follow all that? Hold on, we're far from done yet. Because Don is Don, he also began dating Barbra Streisand in 1987 and 88. He followed up his first album with Let It Roll in 1989, which included background vocals from none other than Barbra Streisand. But then Don dropped everything to help Melanie Griffith, his former wife, get into an addiction treatment facility. This rekindled a spark, and he dumped Barbara and he remarried Melanie in 1989. Melanie bore his second child that year, daughter Dakota Johnson. They separated in 1994 and were divorced for the second time in 1996. You're going to think that I'm making this up, but somehow, somewhere in between Streisand and Melanie number 2, Johnson was briefly romantically linked with Dead Bang co-star Penelope Ann Miller in 1989, and also Uma Thurman, who was 18 at the time. As a TV phenomenon and rock star, Don's need for speed went far beyond the Ferraris he drove on screen. He became a world-class offshore powerboat racer, winning the APBA Offshore World Cup in 1988. In 1995, Don was seen out and about with model Carrie Whitman. In 1996 and 97, Don dates Jodie Lynn O'Keefe. She was 18 at the time and he was 47. Jodie played his daughter on the show Nash Bridges, so this sounds wacky until you realize it's just Don. In 1997, Johnson was sued by the former production assistant for Nash Bridges as well as his former chauffeur for sexual harassment. The suits were filed after Don accused them of trying to extort millions from him in exchange for not suing them. The suits were dropped after a confidential settlement. It was in 1999 that we had another significant milestone in Don's dating history. He met nursery school teacher and San Francisco socialite Kelly Flegler in 1997 at a birthday party for then San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown. Kelly was formerly semi-famous for being the longtime girlfriend of Governor Gavin Newsom. Don is 18 years older than she is. Kelly was spotted wearing a 5.5 carat diamond ring, probably worth at least a Ferrari or two from dear old Don. The two married, this being Don's 5th marriage, and they started having babies. A daughter, Atherton Grace, was born in 1999. a son, Jasper Breckenridge, in 2002, and another son, Deacon, born in 2006. This was a new Don. He really settled down with Kelly. They remain married to this day after an incredible 26 years. Don has said in interviews he chased after materialistic things and became addicted to drugs and alcohol and even addicted to women in an attempt to fill a large hole inside himself. None of those things managed to give him permanent happiness. It wasn't until he began to understand himself, to conquer some of his inner demons, that he was able to find what he needed in this relationship with Kelly and the family they built together. In 2002, customs officers at the Swiss-German border stopped Johnson's car for a routine inspection. Don thought nothing of this stop, joking around with the officials and even signing an autograph or two. Johnson was returning to Germany after a meeting in Switzerland and was accompanied by two people, a personal assistant and a Swiss financial advisor. Officers discovered a briefcase in the trunk of the car containing $8 billion worth of credit notes, receipts, and certificates. This struck them as odd, although Johnson tried to explain the paperwork was related to investors he was trying to bring on board for a collaboration with a film production company. They made copies of all the paperwork and allowed Don and team to go on their way. Months later, tabloids in Europe began running stories about embezzlement and money laundering associated with Johnson. A spokesman for the local customs investigation department in Germany was quoted as saying, "There's reasonable suspicion that Mr. Johnson was working for others. If everything is legal, you don't have to transport documents worth this amount in a car." Johnson ended up on Larry King denying all wrongdoing, and months after the firestorm hit, it just stopped, with German authorities apologizing for any misunderstandings or hardship. In another odd story, in 2008, just hours before losing his ranch in Woody Creek, Colorado to foreclosure, Johnson paid off an incredible $14.5 million worth of debt. And then in 2010, LA jurors awarded Johnson more than $23 million in a lawsuit over profits of the Nash Bridges show. Johnson had sued Reicher Entertainment, saying he owned half of the Nash Bridges copyright. Reicher eventually settled with Johnson with a $19 million payment. Johnson has stayed busy with films like Django Unchained by Quentin Tarantino in 2012, the popular Knives Out film from Rian Johnson in 2019, and the Dr. Odyssey series in 24 and 25. I most recently saw him in a Netflix movie called Rebel Ridge, where he looked younger than his years and as charismatic as ever. Johnson has always had a reputation of a luxurious, hedonistic lifestyle. His romantic relationships are so numerous it's hard to even keep track of them for a biography like this. He has never shied away from a wild, bad boy image. In a recent appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live, Johnson told the host about a time when he visited President Jimmy Carter in the White House in 1975 and smoked Mary Jane there with several musicians. He has struggled with addictions over the years and was known to abuse alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, and quaaludes. From boat races to Ferrari chases, from chart-topping songs to Hollywood stardom, Don has broken hearts and chased happiness in full view of the public for decades. What is next for this man who has sailed every sea of fame and keeps churning out success and fascinating fans? Hit like and subscribe and comment below about your favorite Don Johnson moments.